Right. Okay. So going to share some ideas which are broadly speaking on the topic of Emuna, which is obviously a very central part of Yetzias Mitzrayim, and specifically in relation to Parshas Beshalach. You look at right at the beginning of the Sedra, the Pasuk says, Pasuk says, Pasuk Yud Tes. Pasuk Tes, Vaikach Moshe Satzmos Yosef Imoy. Moshe takes the bones of Yosef with him. Because he made Bnei Yisrael make a shvua that Hashem will remember you, and you will take up my bones with you. So this is a fulfillment of the shvua. Rashi says that why did he not ask him to take them immediately? Because they wouldn't have the capability to do so. Once Yosef died, they would have to wait till afterwards. And the question is, there are a number of questions here. The Al-Sheikh HaKadosh asks, why was it that they're informed of this? We're informed of this now. By Kach Moshe Satzmos Yosef Imoy, right? You should have told us last week, right? When they left Mitzrayim, they Kach Moshe Satzmos Yosef Imoy. Why is it that it's now, at the beginning of Parshas Beshalach, that we talk about the bones of Yosef Hatzad? And he says, and this is where it comes bound up in the concept of Emuna. And at the heart of this moment, when they've left already and they're entering the midbar, they're entering the desert, as the next pasuk says, and they encamp at Esam, which is Biktsei HaMidbar, the edge of the midbar. And the question is, says the Al-Sheikh like this: how did they know that 400 years had passed? They knew there was a promise to Avraham Avinu that they would be 400 years. Kigeria Zarachem, right? There'll be these states of 400 years. Maybe it was only, they weren't nearly there. They knew there had been 210. How do they know how to calculate the 400 years? Could be they weren't aware exactly how to make these calculations. So therefore they needed a sign that the real moment of Geula had arrived, the real moment of redemption. And the proof was the Atzmos Yosef, the bones of Yosef. Why? Because Yosef HaTzadik made his children promise two oaths. And that is the phrase Pokod Yifkod. You will surely remember the twice, right? Number one, the first thing was that this phrase, Pokod Yifkod, right, is a phrase that will identify the true Goyal, the one who is actually going to redeem you. That's the idea of the phrase Pokod Yifkod, because we know that Moshe Rabbeinu uses the same phrase. Yeah, that's the same when he at the snare, Yosef uses it, and then it's used by Moshe Rabbeinu. This phrase accompanies them the whole way. In other words, it's like a code that they needed to pass on through future generations, that this is the phrase through which you will identify who is the true Redeemer. The second oath, the second shvua that Yosef made them make is the V'hatli semes atzmo etchem, right? The idea of bringing up his bones from Mitzrayim, the two together. Interestingly, the Al-Sheikh says the Pokadati, right, or Pokod Yifkod, as it says here, this is, what are the two phrases? What are the double remembrance? What does this phrase mean? So he says, number one, it's V'hitzeisias Tivosai, because the idea being that Hashem says that this phrase, V'hitzeisias Tivosai, Samim Bnei Yisrael Mitzrayim, there were two aspects to the shibud, the enslavement. There's the Bnei Yisrael themselves, and Hashem says, I will remove my hosts. There's the idea of the Malachim or whatever who were also accompanying them in Mitzrayim. So those are the remembrances on both levels, the spiritual level and also the physical level, and both will leave Mitzrayim together. The point, says the Al-Sheikh, about the transportation of Yosef being highlighted here is that this is what gives them no doubt. What gives them no doubt that it was certainly the moment of Geula and that they were being redeemed and that this was the true moment, that the Pokod Yifkod and Pokod Bokadi had actually been fulfilled, was the transportation of Yosef, because he had promised them the key of Pokod Pokadi. And I think what the Al-Sheikh is trying to convey here is, as we'll see, there's links to other ideas which hopefully we'll look at, is the idea of the reassurance they needed and the challenge they felt in terms of their Emuna. Almost as if they needed to see Yosef. You understand? They needed to see Yosef with them, because the transportation of Yosef meant that they would, the two were together. Yeah, exactly. It was the two were together. It was the two oaths being fulfilled together. Carry my bones with you, and I'm the one, remember, who told you that it was pokoi pokadati, pokoi yifkoi, right? That these two phrases indicate that it's the real Geula. So we get a sense of the challenges that they are faced with in terms of strengthening their Emuna. What is the enemy? What is the real enemy that they face? So the pasuk says, one second. We're not going exactly in order here. Let me just find what I'm looking for. We're looking for the words of Pharaoh. Kriv, 1 second. There we go. Prosecute. They pursued them and they encountered them camped by the sea. So then the pasuk says, Pharaoh and Pharaoh came near by Yisuv and Israel, and they lift up their eyes. Mitzrayim are journeying after them. Vayiru Ma'od, they're very afraid. They cry out to Hashem. The Keramat Tzvi asks that there's a difficulty here with this pasuk because it begins with a Paro Hikriv, as Rashi says, the Paro leads them. He is nisamitz lekadim lifneihem. He is the leads from the front, right? As he said he would to his people. And then it says they lift up their eyes, and what do they see? They see Mitzrayim running off, pursuing them, and they're very afraid as a result. And now, why doesn't it say that they saw Paro? Right? Paro is clearly the main. He's the main thing. He's the one leading all of them. Why the switch? Paro Hikriv, but they saw Mitzrayim, right? And also, he says, why was it that specifically they were afraid? What caused them to be afraid now? We just said before, just a few psukim before, they went out with an outstretched hand. They were confident Hashem was with them. So why now are they suddenly scared? And he says like this: when they saw Paro, they weren't afraid. Why? Because they understood the concept and they'd experienced in Mitzrayim the concept of Leiv Melech B'yad Hashem. The heart of the king is in the hand of Hashem. They saw how Hashem manipulated Paro. His free will, his free choice is taken away, right? Hashem hardened his heart. They'd seen the way he was molded and shaped as a king. But but when they saw Mitzrayim, when they saw the people, right, the regular Egyptians pursuing them, and that was what scared them, because they knew that they had regular bechira. They had free choice. They had regular bechira. Paro was, in a sense, did not have that free choice, but they had free choice, and that was what scared them. That was what scared them, right? Because and he brings a proof, interestingly, from Sefer Shmuel, where Shmuel says, "How can I go?" When he was sent on a mission to Shaul, and he's worried what Shaul will do. How can I go? V'shama Shaul v'hargein, and Shaul will hear and kill me. Why doesn't it say Shama Shaul HaMelech, Shaul the king? And the answer is because if he's a king, if he's still a king, because it's about deposing him and everything else, he wouldn't be afraid, because you understand, kings don't have that same level of free choice. Interesting concept that ordinary people do, because this concept of Leiv Melech B'yad Hashem, it's almost as if they are needed for global events. They are manipulated, right, in a way that's necessary in a broader sense. But he says, if Shmuel was saying, if I'm removing Shaul from being a king, he's no longer a king, and therefore he has that complete free choice, so to speak, again. And therefore, I'm worried that Shaul, the ordinary Shaul, will kill me. So that's his proof. But here, what I think he's highlighting is that what scares the Bnei Yisrael, what causes them to worry, is the very fact that there's an entire people who are genuinely have free will, and yet they've been so persuaded and so brought along on this by Paro, that causes them genuine fear. That causes them to genuinely worry, and that's why they see Bnei Yisrael and they worry. If you look at Perek Yud Dalet Pasuk Yud, so this is again, like I said, it's just the same Pasuk. Yes, sorry. By Yisuv Bnei Yisrael Seinayim. Yeah, so this is another idea. Paro Hikriv. So the let's look at Rashi. Rashi says Vayitzaku. Rashi says Vayitzaku Tofsu Umnus Avoso. What does it mean? Where did they get this from? What did they cry out from? Because with Avram Avinu cries out on Har Moriah, the place where he stood. But Yitzchak, it says, Lasuach Basada, that he spoke in the field. The same thing, also on Har Moriah, where the Beis Hamikdash. But Yaakov encountered the place. So the idea being that they take hold here, and the crying out by Yitzchaku is all based on the Emuna, the constant Emuna of their ancestors. And Shimon Schwab in his main Shoeva says, why is it that this particular tefillah is so closely associated with the Avos until we say that they take hold of the trade, the craft, right? That's really what it means, the umnus avosa of their ancestors. What is going on here? He says, at the end of the day, why do you need all that? Why they Vayitzaku? Because they're scared, they're terrified for their lives. Well, what is the link here? That they're taking hold of the craft of their ancestors when they cry out Hashem. They cry out Hashem because they're worried they're going to die. That's what they're crying. That's what they're crying. And he says another question. The Rashbam in Psochim says there's a Gemara there which says, a very famous Gemara. Rav Shezi says in the name of Rabbi Birnbaum, Koshin Mezonus Shel Adam Kriyas Yam Suf, that the Parnasa, achieving Parnasa, is as difficult as splitting the sea. And the Rashbam says that Hashem does a great nace, a miracle, for one who, when he gives a person his sustenance, just as he did to the Bnei Yisrael when he split the sea for them. And the idea is, says the Rashbam, what the Gemara is trying to convey is, why is this relevant? Because this shows you how much you have to daven. In order to make sure that you daven, because it's an incredibly difficult thing to achieve a parnasa, just as difficult it is to split the Yam Suf. And he says, Rashab says, why is it? What is going on here? That since it's a great miracle, right? Therefore, you need to daven. Why? You need to daven for everything. You need to ask Hashem for mercy for everything, right? Why is a person's parnasa sort of less than anything else you need? What's he coming to tell us? That in this, because it's a great miracle, because it's such a miracle, therefore you need to daven. So he says like this. If you look at, he brings together and links it together in the following, to answer both these questions in the following way. He says, if you look at the Nusach and Tzlichus, we say, Aneinu k'shanisel Avraham b'Har Moriah, right? Very famous Tzlichus, Aneinu k'shanis, just like you answered Avraham Avinu, so to answer on Har Moriah, so to answer us. And he says, this is an astonishing phrase. Where do you see that Avraham Avinu davened? Where did he daven on Har Moriah? Aneinu, just like you answered Avraham Avinu on Har Moriah. Where did he daven on? You don't find that. And what was he davening for? At the end of the day, he was fulfilling what he was told. What he was told to do. What was it? What was the answering? What was he davening for? So he says that his suggestion is like this: that Avraham Avinu was davening on Har Moriah for a strengthening of faith, his chazkus be'emuna, for strengthening his faith, even though he was involved in doing Hashem's will. He was bringing Yitzchak onto the Mizbeach for the Akedah. But he was worried that challenge would lead to a weakening in his emunah. And that is what the reference is. Aneinu k'sha'anisa l'Avraham Avinu b'Har Moriah. That he was answered on this tefillah, the tefillah that his emunah should remain strong despite what he was being made to go through, despite the challenge of having to offer up his son. And he says that's the same thing. That is the same idea of the tefillah here of the Bnei Yisrael. That's the link, right? Remember the link Rashi brings. By Yitzchaku, they took hold of the trade, the umnus of their ancestors, the pathway towards Emuna that Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov had. In what sense? They believed that there would be a miracle. They knew there would be a menace, but they were worried when they saw, by Yiru Ma'od, when they saw Mitzrayim pursuing them, they were terrified. That even though they trusted in Hashem, they knew Bnei Yisrael, Yotzim v'Yod Rama, of course Hashem would have taken them out. He's not going to take them out to perish in the Yam Suf. They're going to survive, but they were worried because they couldn't remove that fear, that terror from their hearts. And therefore they davened in the same way as Avraham Avinu did to strengthen their emunah, keep their emunah strong despite being in this difficult place. It wasn't that they didn't believe, right, that Hashem would save them. It wasn't that they didn't believe, like Avraham Avinu, he knew what he had to do, but that he needed to come out of it unscathed. spiritually, right? And to come out of it unscathed. And he says that's what we say as well. Right? Just like you answer, also part of that tefillah, right? Just like you answered our ancestors on the Yam Suf. In what way? The same thing, the same parallel to Avraham Avinu. They davened for support in Emuna. And he says everything about the davening of the Ovos and Hamarim was all about strengthening Emuna. That's what it was. But they shouldn't be damaged to what their experiences were. Same thing he says with Yaakov. You find Vayifka b'mokom. What's the idea? He realized that he needed to daven for Emuna, that he was going outside Eretz Yisrael, but he would remain strong. It's all the same idea. And he says that's what the Rashba means, to answer the second question, when he says you have to ask for daven, right? He says you need to ask to daven for Emuna. If a person is working hard for a parnasa to earn a living, and he has trust in Hashem that Hashem will support him, and even so, sometimes it doesn't work and it's very difficult. So he's worried that maybe their concern is that maybe his bitachon, his faith, and his emunah would become weakened as a result. And he says that is the idea that that is what the Gemara is saying, Rashbam is saying, a person needs to daven for. Just as our ancestors on the Yam Suf davened for the fact that they shouldn't let their emunah be weakened through the experience, so too in the daily grind and in the struggles for parnasa, the key tefillah is, let me emerge from this unscathed, right? Unscathed. That's the idea, right? The great nace of the great miracle of Kriyas Yam Suf, is a parallel, to the miracle of earning a living, which often can feel and seem like a nace. We want to emerge from it unscathed. The parallels that we did daven, we emerge from it unscathed. That struggle with our emunah intact. That's the tefillah. The Vilna Gaon in his Pirush on the Haggadah brings a beautiful idea on the two psukim, which are almost identical, very similar. If you look at Pasuk Chof Beis, same pair, Pasuk Chof Beis and Pasuk Chof Tes. There's two psukim about Mayim Lehem Chaymo, right? And the question is, why are these two psukim? You know this word? Great, beautiful. So it's worth repeating. No, I mean, I'm saying it's not honest. You won't mind hearing it again. Okay. So what is the difference between the two psukim? Right? That's the first one. And there was a wall. And the second one is, where is the second one? It is Chof Tes, right? Chof Tes, just before the Shira. What is the difference? Why is the water same thing? And the waters were a wall on the right and the left. Why does this need to be repeated? There is a slight difference. The first time it says that the Bnei Yisrael went. Compare the two psukim, yeah. The first time it says that they went b'soich hayom by Abosha, into the sea on dry land, and the second time it says holchu vayabosha, in the dry land, b'soich hayom, inside the sea. That's one difference. The word choma is different. The second thing is that I mean, the question is also why it's twice repeated that they went into the sea. But the phrase here of and the phrase about the water as well being the wall. And then why does it say once with a vov in Chof Beis it says choma with a vov, and in the second one Chof Tes it said choma, a wall. The waters were a wall without the vov. So what is the difference? What is the answer? And they say b'shem the Vilna Gaon that the answer is like this. There were two groups in the Bnei Yisrael. There were the people who were tzaddikim, those who were ma'aminim in Hashem, who had that strong emunah, bali b'tochen, people who trusted in Hashem, right? And they went immediately into the sea, right? They went b'soich hayom, by Yavov Bnei Yisrael b'soich hayom. They were straight into the sea by Abosha, and then it was on dry. It was on dry land. That's the Nachshon ben Aminodov, right? That jumped in and they followed those who were tzaddikim and followed straight after him. Okay, and this is the idea. And he brings a medrash. The medrash says, what's the difference? What's the difference between HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, why should the Bnei Yisrael be saved? And the answer is because of this emunah, because of this bitachon, the fact they jump into the sea. Okay. so with on that, and that's it. And then afterwards it was the Abosh in the sense that the sea split. Okay, and the water therefore is a chomo, is a wall. But the second group were not so believing. They had to follow, and they had to it was almost like they had to be pushed in until they saw. They didn't go in until they wouldn't go into the sea until they saw the dry land first. Right? They had to see the dry land first. They had to see the dry land, otherwise they wouldn't have gone in. And for them, the water was more of a chemo rather than choimo. Chemo means wrath or anger. It was a kitrig. It was against them, so to speak, right? Because, you're same idea. Yeah. So that's the difference. You understand? The first time it's a choimo, it's a general wall, it's a wall, and the second time in Ma'amlahem, it's spelled chemo as if it's anger. It's a criticism on like, why did you have to wait so long before you went in? Why didn't you just go in straight away? So that's the Vilna Gaon. And the final idea is to go back to the beginning, the very first posuk. And this is a classic question, which is asked on just the first few words of the parsha. Why is it Vayhi Beshalach Paro? Right? Why is it Beshalach Paro when Paro sent the Bnei Yisrael? When we say Hallel, we say B'tzeis Yisrael Mitzrayim. They went out. Why are we interested in Paro? Why is Paro involved? Why is the fact that it was with his permission almost, right? Emphasized in this way. All right, why is that? Why is the Exodus presented that it's Paro's permission that allows them to leave when he sends them out? And the Ksava Kabbalah says one approach. He says, it demonstrates the fulfillment, the truth of the will of Hashem, and how that will is effected. That he was forced to remove them. He was forced to take them out for eternal freedom. So according to the Ksava Kabbalah, the idea is that it emphasizes the forcing of Paro, the Shalach Paro, that he had to do it. He had to be involved, that Hashem orchestrated it, that he actually sent them out, even though he had restrained and tried to hold back for so long. The Malbim has a different approach. The Malbim says there are two reasons why it had to be that Paro, that the sending out was through Paro's will, and it wasn't that his hand had to be forced, so to speak, with the Yod Chazaka and the threat of war, even though, of course, it was through the Makkos and everything else. But the ultimate final sending was a sending where he sent them out himself. And why is that? He says there were two reasons. Number one, he says, the Gula itself was not the right time. But they hadn't yet finished the 400 years. In a sense, they were still under Paro's control. The years hadn't yet been completed, and therefore they could not go out in a spiritual sense without Paro releasing them. That's one idea. But he says the second reason is the support of Hashem will only fall in order for the Bnei Yisrael to this idea, the Bnei Yisrael who are b'ma'at am, which means they are very few of them in number, very few numerically, to be victorious over people who are giborim, melumdei melchama, accustomed to war. How are they able to be victorious? There are two conditions that are necessary. Number one, hachana hativis, he says. They have to have that internal, natural preparedness. They have to have, he calls it a leiv ametz v'ruach gavaya, have to be strong, and they have to be a lofty spirit, because that is what enables them. Because that's how the spiritual influence from Hashem will fall upon them to give them the strength to be victorious above the natural way, the derech hateva. That's one thing that's necessary, that natural preparation to receive it and to be able to go out. The second, he says, is ha'achona al yedei hazchus v'hakishron shiu meleim emuna b'tochen b'Hashem. That they have to have the merits, they have to have the schus, they have to be prepared and ready to be full of emuna and trust in Hashem, that they will be victorious, that they will be successful. And at this stage of their journey, at this embryonic stage still, when they're just going out of Mitzrayim, they were lacking both of these factors. That's what the Malbim says. They were lacking both. They were lacking that sort of on the more physical, the practical side, what he calls the natural preparedness to, strength of character, whatever you want to call it, literal physical strength to be able to break out through with Hashem's help from Mitzrayim. And the second aspect also, the idea that in order to be exit, if you like, themselves, they'd have to be full of emunah and trust in Hashem. And at this stage, they hadn't yet achieved that. And I think that what you see from the Malbim, and really this ties in all of the ideas that we've discussed, is that the emunah is a journey. It's very much a journey. And we have to learn these psukim that this is the journey they are on. So all the challenges they face, right? The challenges they face, and they cry out to Hashem because they don't know and they're worried, and they see Mitzrayim, as we said, the Mitzrayim are running after them, and they have Bechira and they have free choice, and look what they're doing, they're going to attack us in the fear, and they have to take hold. And then even when they do believe, they know it's going to happen, but they're terrified. Why are they terrified? And the fact they're terrified means that they have to daven, right? That their emunah will stay strong. A person can get through something, yeah, and you can believe that Hashem will help you through something, but you can come out a bit battered, as in an emunah wise. People go through in a soil, and you survive, you come out, but the faith is damaged, and that's very dangerous. And that's the link to the Ovos who went through these experiences. Avram Avinu and Har Maria is davening that not only, right, what's his tefillah? Yeah, his tefillah is that don't let my emunah, my faith, be shaken by this tremendous test I have to pass. And the Malbim says that this is a journey, and they weren't there yet, and that's why it's Vayhi Beshalach Paro. Paro is sending them out. They're still in a place where they don't have necessarily the strength of character themselves. And I think that is a chizuk in emunah. It's a chizuk in emunah, in faith, if we know that that's the journey that's experienced here. The journey of our ancestors, of Bnei Yisrael, is a journey of emunah, and the same components that they're experiencing in Parshas Beshalach through Kriyas Yam Suf are exactly the same. All these components are exactly the same as we experience ourselves in our own lives, which I think is a very powerful and moving idea. So thank you all for joining. I wish you a good Shabbos. Okay, good Shabbos.
Thank you.
Okay,
good Shabbos.